Hey, what's going on, man? So I thought I'd make a tutorial video for you on Visual Studio 2022. So without further ado, let's get to it. So when you get everything installed and you go through your installer, so if I can actually show you the Visual Studio installer, I'm going to show you what you need to install. So if mine, I've already got it installed, but if you haven't already, the few things you need to start getting started with C++ is you're going to need the .NET development, desktop development package. You're going to need the development in C++. This kind of includes everything with that. If you're going to do mobile development, you could always choose that. For gaming, if you want to build games with DirectX, you can actually just grab this one with C++ as well. Just go ahead and check that box. And if you want to create extensions for the development for Visual Studio, so you can actually create different types of extension environments and things like that, and add-ons and whatever for Visual Studio with new commands, code analyzers, total window or tool windows, stuff like that. You can do it. If you have a remote Linux OS running, you can actually compile Linux directly through here, but you gotta be able to have a remote device, have another computer hooked up and all that shit. But other than that, those are the only few you need. And I like to install while downloading, so whatever downloads, it'll install. Both of those will work simultaneously the same way, so that helps get everything kind of installed quicker. Okay, so once you understand that, let's go ahead and go back and start up Visual Studio. Now, when you create a actual project or a solution, you're going to have your solutions, like your project names in here. I just have some tests, some mixed different things, stuff like that. But if you're curious, you can also clone a repository. If you have the URL or the actual GitHub repo URL, you can actually copy it over on the repo on their repository page. You can put it in there, but for this sake of it, we're just going to create a new project. And you have a choice of selecting from different ones. Some of these won't be available to you because you have to install the packages for certain types of languages and environment, stuff like that. So the core features for each language. But I usually start out with the empty project just for the sake of this. You can start on anything else you particularly want, but this will work just fine. And just name it whatever. We're just going to name it tester. I don't really care. Now, I choose mine in the repo solution folder. You can choose your location to be anywhere you want. You can also choose to the solution name, which will be up here. It'll be the same as that. You can also place the solution and project in the same directory. So I'll show you the reason why this would probably really help you out a lot, but go ahead and check box this if you want to, but I'll show you why you need to. So go ahead and check that. Unless you want to do it the way I'm doing it when I'm going to show you, then leave it unchecked. But if you're curious, you can always just delete the project and just go back and create the new project again with the same name and you're fine. But for the sake of this, I'm going to leave it unchecked. So when you get started, I know that there's a new version available, so I'm not going to download that at the current moment. But after so long, you see that P up there, that's going to be your email, your account associated with Microsoft. This is a community edition. It's the free, and it's got everything you freaking need to make games or anything you want. You don't need to buy that main full professional version, but there is ways of getting it and actually getting serial keys, which people actually release their keys to the public, and they can be used more than once, especially offline or whatever. There's ways of getting around it, but that's not important. Usually a lot of the old Visual Studios, like 2003 and under, or 2008 if I'm not mistaken, used a serial key of 11111111 or something like that, and every one of them used that to actually register that for you as you went through the setup. And it was so nice because they have become deprecated, so any version you get on the internet has already been, reverse engineer hacked, and it's deprecated, which means it's abandoned software, so it doesn't have any updates or anything pushed through Microsoft with it. But a lot of your old games use those old Visual Studio versions, and you can still find the ISOs and install them on your Windows machine, but as far as I'm concerned. You never know. Now, I don't know. You may be using Linux. I have no idea what kind of distro you're using. Or if you're using Windows 11 or Windows 10, still will be applied the same here as before, all right? Excuse me. All right, so what I want to show you is this is your solution, okay? And inside your solution, you have what we call a tree view, which is just your project file. And you have these folder directories. This is where your header files goes, your .h files. This is where your resource files goes, your .rc or whatever resource files you may have, and this is your source files, wherever your pp file goes, or even your .c files. In that sense, you can actually compile C code within here, but you have to do a few things in order to do that. But it's really simplified. It took me a while to figure out exactly how to get a good C code to operate here in Visual Studio 2022. So, or any of those older ones in that matter. But let's say, for example, here's your references. Well, let's say you want to add a reference. If you have a dynamic linker like a DLL or something like that that you want to include in this project as part of your core engine, you can actually take and utilize that DLL and have that part of the main application, so then you can call upon and execute code from that DLL project alone into your application to alter the application's core mechanics. So you can do stuff like that as well, but that's not... I just want to show you a few features here, all right? Here's your debug menu. That just means when your local Windows debugger, when you debug your code, it just goes through, it just debugs all your source files and scans all your header files and all that shit. And then once it does, it'll create and generate an output, like an executable or a DLL or whatever you may have the project set up to output, right? So when you want to create a source file, you can either go here or you can go click on it and go to File, New. Well, but probably the easiest thing to do is just go to Source Files, click Add, New Item, and you can just click C++ file, and then you could just add a file called main. Sorry, cap locks. And then here's your source file. Now, in order for the file to compile, you have to have this in here. I'm sorry. I'm still half asleep and I can't really see too well without my glasses, but as long as you have your as long as you have this main file in here and you're executing something, you're returning whatever, and you're doing something here, shit. Like for example, I'm going to printf something, but in order to use printf, you have to include this library. This is, I mean, if you're curious, you can always stdio. You can always I mean, it's not relative. You don't have to use this, but I like this to print or stuff to the console. Oh yeah. All right, so and then I want to put a / in for new line, so I don't have to worry about. So if I want to add another printf, let's say we're just going to add 2, and we're just going to say I love my butt / new line. I'm gonna be a girl for a minute and I'm gonna love my butt. Alright, so anyway, which we all know girls value their butt because that's their asset. Anyway, let's go ahead and hit save. And now, for example, if you wanted to create a header file, we'll do that real quick as well. It's the same principle. Just call it SDK. And it'll just put the .h for you, and you could do stuff like this, or you can include Windows, and then you can include stdio, and then, for example, we can remove this, and we can just #include. Now, if you remember, you see the I didn't use this. See these little arrow brackets? I didn't use those for header files. I used this little quotations or whatever they're called. I'm still half asleep, so I can't even give you an accurate answer, but you get the point. Now when we save it, it'll actually look into that header file based on the C file that I included this header in, and the C file will be able to detect that I included Windows.h, which is the main Windows header for all the Windows stuff and code, blah 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 you want to use in your C file or C++ file, mainly C++ file, but And then the stdio was just a library header, or just a library file that allowed me to use the function printf, and which, if you notice when we highlight over it, it has extern-c. It's an inline integer with the function printf, but it passes a constant char multiplied by the format. So we can basically, it's a constant, so we can use this outside of anywhere we want inside any function in multiple C files, and we don't have to worry about it passing an error that's saying that, we're using this printf function more than one place and its compiler doesn't like it. So anyway, that's pretty much the way it goes. Now what I want to show you here is you can also right click and just hit build, and what's going to happen, it's going to build and it's going to say succeeded. If it failed, it's going to give you a failure and it's going to give you some errors down here. So let's say, for example, I don't put this semicolon in here and I forget it and I try to build it. Okay, if it showed, it said failed based on their project, which is this right here. If you notice, the error says syntax error, missing semicolon before the return statement. So if you notice, here's a return. We forgot our semicolon. So you just kind of go through. Now that's a simplified error. Sometimes library errors can really confuse the hell out of you. They did for me for a while until I got used to them, but it's self-explanatory really. So if we just rebuild, or we can hit local debug and it'll just debug and show our console. And it'll show, oh yeah, I love my butt. So there it is. Now let's say, for example, there's two things I want to show you. So when we right click, we can choose to rebuild, or we can just rebuild the project file or the solution, or we can clean the solution and rebuild the exact project. Or we can go to the debug and do the same thing like we could have just clicked up here. Now we can choose a different target path for a different system architecture, whether it be x86 or x64, or we can also use release or debug, or we can use the configuration manager to actually debug and compile both debug and release. Later versions of Visual Studio had retail and different things, so I don't know. They've changed and deprecated a lot of features from one version to the next revision. So anyway, so when you right click, you can go down here and say, I want to know where my source files were saved. Well, you can actually go here and choose open folder in File Explorer. Just think of this as I'm opening my subfolder where my source code is in a File Explorer. File Explorer is just that icon over here you go to click on, and it searches all your files and an explorer of your hard drive or whatever. When you click on this, now I want to show you something. You remember when I told you can click that checkbox to say that I want to place my solution in the same directory where my project file is right here? Well, you can do that, but guess what you have to do in order to actually get to the actual debug? You have to go back one, then you see your solution, and where your solution is, your x64 would have been placed in this folder right here, and it'd have been so easy just to click, see it, boom. But instead we have to back one, or get our architecture here, debug, and then here's our tester. If we click it, if you notice, it's not doing anything. It's loading up, but it's closing immediately. So if you have a problem with that, I'm going to show you how to fix it. So let's just minimize this so we don't have to go back and do the same shit. Right under these two printfs, the last thing I want it to do is do a system call, and I just want to go system, and then those, and then inside I want to put pause and a semicolon. And basically what this is saying, I want, after you print these two things on my console, I want this console to pause, and I want a direct input from the user before I can close this console or this application. So it's giving the user a way to input a close. Do I want to close it or not, so to speak? So let's just go ahead and build it again. Seeing it succeeded. So let's go ahead and go back to our folder. And if we do a quick refresh, which I always like to do, and we double click it, we see that here it is. Oh yeah, I love my butt. So now if you press any key to continue, that's meaning when I said waits for the user to give some input. If we hit enter, it'll close that and it'll be able to do it now, so we can see your console. Now if you're curious about a PDB file, this is a program debug database. If you're curious, a little hint here, I don't remember if it was Diablo 1 or 2, but actually when somebody was reverse engineering to rewrite the entire game, which they did successfully, and brought back some really cool stuff that was deprecated, or that Blizzard wasn't staying active with anymore, they actually found some program debug database files, which basically is a key to the entire code that you just did. So if we actually look at this in Notepad, we can actually see a little bit about it, and we can see a little bit about what it's doing, some of the code that it's doing. What was really strange about it is those older database files actually gave us most of the code that was written in it. It's really strange, but it looks like that Visual Studio now has done a pretty good job at encrypting most of the data, or not encrypting, I'm sorry, encoding. I said encrypting in the ripping models tutorial, and I'm sorry, it's encoding. And usually what happens is you can usually find a little bit of stuff on how the code is working, but it was really strange because back in the day, these program debug database files were not encoded to a point of view. They were just completely, they gave you every bit of the code so you can learn on how they done a function or whatever. And they just, luckily they had almost every bit of the code. Some person didn't pay attention to what they were leaving in the actual game asset file data and all that stuff. So anyway, you get the point. So that's how you find that information. Now, if you want to change some properties, you want to right click, go to properties, and you can set this for an application exe, a dynamic library or linker, which is a DLL, a static library, which is a .lib, or a makefile. If you want to do some old C code stuff, you can create a makefile which will have everything. So when you run makefile in your there's a library, a platform, I don't know if it's GNU or GCC, whichever one, that it could actually compile this makefile successfully. I don't know particularly for sure. I think though Visual Studio 2022 actually has a way to compile the makefile for you based on their tool set, so you shouldn't have to have any extra external libraries to do that outside of VS. Now you can inherit from the project's defaults, but I keep it executable. You can change your Windows SDK version. So if you have another one installed, you can choose different ones that you have installed. The 10 is the latest. Anybody that's running Windows 10 should be able to run this just fine. The platform tool set. So if you have multiple tool sets you can choose from, I only have this one installed, but you can choose multiple ones and you can be able to click those and use those successfully. The C language standard, you either use default legacy or you can use ISO C11 standard or the 17 standard. I usually just keep it default the way it is, but I don't want to now this is different. Watch these right here, okay? This is a Unicode character set. When you have strings like this, if I was to change this to use multi-byte character set, watch what happens. There's a good chance it's gonna give me an error here, I think. Nope. Okay. Hang on, man. I might show you exactly how. That's strange. Anyway, there's certain ways that it'll give you an error. I don't want to confuse you, but I don't want to write out some code this morning. I got to eat and things I got to do, but it'll actually, some strings and the way you write them will actually pass you an error. So just remember that. Like for example, I think if I'm not mistaken, it's L for library. And if you notice, if it would be something like that, you would have like was it an L or a U, whichever one it was. I can't really remember, but I think it's an L, I think. But you get my point, so you can just leave that the way it is. It don't really matter, but if you get into that and you have a question, just give me your code. I can definitely take a look and tell you what you can do, and it's as simple as just getting into your properties and changing that to either Unicode or a multi-byte character set. Like I said, when I'm half asleep, my brain don't work fully, so this is stuff that I know all the time. I just, in the mornings, my brain breaks. If you want STL checks, just go ahead and choose that. Now, here's a fun thing. If you want to include, if you want to change your preprocessor definitions, if you want to use certain type of of C functions, you have to use a preprocessor definition in here before it'll actually pass the compiler to use it. So if you ever run into that, just let me know. I can give you an easy way to fix that instead of going on Stack Overflow and having a bunch of morons tell you ain't answered or you ain't asked your question in a more clear state of mind. That place is a joke. If you go to advanced, you can disable specific warnings in your code. So if you want to make it cleaner and the warnings are not important that bad, you can just disable those and add the actual warning. I won't confuse you on that. Your output files, like I said, it's just the same. Your optimization, you can allow optimization for the code to run faster, but usually release should just remember something too. Release mode, your game and your code or your application is going to run a lot more faster and more smoother versus debug. So just keep that in mind. But you can also include additional, where is it? Have they changed the way that is since that last update? Please tell me you didn't, guys. Come on. Please tell me you didn't. Where is it anyway? Oh my goodness, they did. So we're the more header units. They've changed the way that is. Why would you all do that? I mean, I guess it's not a bad thing, but holy shit. Now, your pre-compiled headers, I never use them, but you can use them if you choose to, but they're just a pain in the ass when you compile code. I never do use them. Usually you have an additional libraries, and I'm guessing they've changed that to unit dependencies. I don't know where it is unless they've set it somewhere else, because you can go to linker and go to general and you can use additional library directories, and that's basically what you would use, your linker, so your header files, and then your and I'm assuming they've messed around with it, or my brain's not working right anyway. But now here's something I wanted to help you too, okay? So in case you're compiling an application or a console. If I have my subsystem set to console, I can compile int main just fine. But if I don't, say for example, if I don't, and I have something like a int when main, like a when main function, like let me if you have a when main function, which is an application style function, you would want to change this to a Windows, which is right here, a subsystem Windows. If you have a when main, if you have an int main, it's usually just a console. If it's a Windows application that actually generates a window or a full screen window, you know when you double click a game executable and it brings up a full screen or it brings up a window, well that's what they're calling a when main function, and it has everything there to create that window, and then of course everything else with your DirectX and all that, your Z buffer, your GPU accessible, all that stuff, everything helps you to draw graphics and shit to the screen. But as far as that's concerned, keep that in mind. So if I'm doing a console, I want to keep that the same, okay? Other than that, I know it's a lot to take in, but I'll leave the videos up. They're unlisted as long as you have the the links that I give you. Just go into the Whisper and you should be fine, and there's no problem with it, so just remember that. And yeah, so that's pretty much really the only things you really need to know. I can't really say anything else more than that. You can use breakpoints. If you're curious, if you want to set a breakpoint, you can insert a breakpoint, and in your code you can kind of debug the code and kind of breakpoint and see how things statistically are working with inside your code, basically like a code unit. But as far as I'm concerned, you never really use them unless you're trying to figure out bugs and problems that's in your code that you're trying to fix. Other than that, breakpoints are great for that. Anyway, there's a lot of features to this, but that's the basics right there. I just want you to know, okay? And just learn from that. And if you need some more help, I can go over some advanced features of this, and you should be fine. But anyway, you got your diagnostic tools, but that's like I said, just stick with the basics and you should be good. Anyway, hope this helped you out.